Welcome to Conversations on Showing Up for Kids. My name is Tim Markle. I am the Director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. Conversations on Showing Up for Kids is the time that we get together and we have informal conversations about topics that matter to families. Today, I am so excited that we are going to be talking about the Children's Long-Term Support Waiver. We do have a specific topic, but I do want to let you know that at no point in this should any of this conversation be construed as legal advice or medical advice. We are just holding a conversation among friends, colleagues, and families. Also know that if you do choose to unmute and speak, you will be recorded, so please try to limit, if not have any at all, personal identifiable health information or personal identifiable information. Please, we try to keep that off of recordings as best as we can. So without any further ado, our topic today, Children's Long-Term Support Waiver Program, and especially this thing called Deciding Together, which I think is a great phrase. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. I am not going to introduce everybody. They are going to introduce themselves as they answer a series of questions that'll keep our flow going. So the first question that I have for you guys is that, part of the Children's Long-Term Support Waiver Program includes supporting child's outcome and an individual service plan. As a parent, I don't know if I've ever designed an individual service plan for my child. I know I have one on my heater and my furnace, but I do not have an individualized service plan for my child. I'm sure it's not the same as my furnace. So could someone tell me how you would describe what an individual service plan or an ISP is?
Sure, Tim. So I will introduce myself. I'm Lisa Steffen, and I come to you from the Manitowoc County Birth to 3 and Children's Long-Term Support Program. And I get to be the speaker for the ISP portion. So I'm just going to hit some bullet points. And if you guys have questions or the rest of the team want to chime in, please feel free. And Tim as well, you can feel free to chime in and ask me questions. So an ISP, so individual service plan, it's a document that lays out what your child and family would like to work on or improve with the help of your support and service coordinator through the Children's Long-Term Support Program. So sometimes people can think about an ISP like a roadmap of where you want to go and how are we going to get to that place. Every child that's in the Children's Long-Term Support Program has a service plan, an individualized service plan. After they are found functionally and financially eligible for programming, that's when that process starts of developing an individual service plan. So I think the most important thing to know about an ISP or an individual service plan is that it is very unique to every single child. There's no two children that probably have the same exact individual service plan. Because every single family is different and has different outcomes and goals for their child. So I often like to think about like all the I words, right? Like ISP, and or if you think about the Birth to 3 program, we have an IFSP. And in special education, we have what's called an IEP. So the ISP, the individual service plan, is really specific to the children's long-term support. And it's really our roadmap. So as I said, every child's plan looks very different. Family A may be looking for and have a need for respite, and their need for respite might be that they need to go grocery shopping once a week and they just need a break to go do that grocery shopping. Well, family B might also have a need for respite, but their respite looks way different because they're just looking for a break on the weekends. They just need to get away. So it looks very different child to child. So what to put on an ISP, it really starts with that conversation with the support and service coordinator and the family. And in that deciding together process. And your next question, I think, is going to lead into a little bit more of what deciding together looks like. But really, it's your family and your child's unique needs, goals, outcomes, and preferences that are discussed. And those should all be seen within that individual service plan. So you should see those things that were discussed in the deciding together process within that document.
So Lisa?
Yep.
I'm just curious. I'm listening to this, and this is awesome because what I'm understanding is that this is designed around the family, around the child's needs, and what they need in the area of support to be able to thrive. Is this like just centered on any one specific topic in the family's life? Like, is it just focused on school? Is it just focused around their home? Is it focused on transportation? what all could go into an individualized service plan?
Yeah, so you brought me right into my next bullet point, Tim. Really, it really is, the ISP will list the top outcomes and services for a family. So that doesn't mean it necessarily is just what Children's Waiver can fund. It really is looking at the entire family and that entire child. So on that service plan, you're going to have, what does school look like for this child? Or maybe they're in some outpatient therapy. That would be something that would be on this document. We're looking at the entire child, their entire life, where they go to school, what they're doing outside of school, are they hanging out with friends, extended family. That is all something that's taken into consideration when developing an ISP, not an IFSP. So all of those would be listed on a child's ISP. And really, I think the important thing to know is that when you're starting to develop that ISP with a family, the support and service coordinator is really there to just listen to what that family's needs and wants are. And then we kind of chime in with maybe things we know as professionals and things that can get you to that roadmap, get you the services that maybe would be helpful. And sometimes that isn't always a waiver funded service. It might be something that your community has within their resources, or another county program might have something to help your family. So I think the one other thing that's really important to note is that an individual service plan is not something that once you develop it, it's set in stone. It's something that can change as your family's needs change. It can be reviewed really at any point in time throughout the process. It definitely needs to be reviewed at least every 6 months at the recertification or the 6-month review, but really at any point in time can be reviewed. So
I really like that as a parent, because I know my kiddo is continually growing and changing. And we don't want to just have a set of goals that, oh, it's met, therefore we're done. Is hopefully the goals will build on each other. Is that once we accomplish this, well, that is fantastic, because then that means we can look at the next step. So that with having this as a living document, it could continue to build on those gains that the family and children have throughout the years that they're being supported by the Children's Long-Term Support Program. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And, I even think about like transitions. There's so many transitions that you and your family may go through, moving to a different school, what does that look like? Do we need to support you in a different way? What does that ISP need to change in that sense? So, yeah.
Before we go on to the next question, you did bring up eligibility for the program and enrolling in the program. And I just want to let people know we're not going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of eligibility and enrollment today. But if they want to go back, we did have a wonderful conversation with some of your colleagues. And so you can find that information on Conversations on Showing Up for Kids. It's under our Public Supports Health Benefits post. And so if you look under there, you're going to find the conversation that we held on what are the Children's Long-Term Support and Katie Beckett programs. And in that conversation, we get into what is eligibility and how can you enroll. So just wanted to let people know if that's one of their questions, we have somewhere that they can go for those answers. So now you've kind of explained what an ISP is. Part of the individual service plan is this thing called outcomes. And again, this is not something that I'm familiar with in thinking about my child's life as outcomes. Maybe back when, I was doing chemistry or something, way back in the day, there would be an outcome. How does an outcome apply to an individualized service plan? How does it apply to my child? What is it? Because I'm used to thinking of, I'll set goals for my kid. Is the goal the same thing as an outcome?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Schmier. I am a program specialist. We formerly used to be called TAs, Technical Assistance Leads. I work for DHS and I support the CLTS program in the Northeast part of the state. And we wanted to touch on outcomes and goals, and we admit we do tend to use the word outcome and goal a lot of times as though they're the same. However, they are different, but they do go together for sure, and they need each other. Like one really can't exist without the other. But we thought we would walk you through, next slide, please, Tara, with how they're different. So an outcome is what you hope to achieve or be able to do or see happening in the future for your child or for your family life. So it's kind of real broad, big, it can be broad, big picture. Whereas a goal is a smaller step that needs to be accomplished to get to that outcome. An outcome can have more than one goal. It might have many goals. Probably it will have many goals. And the reason why outcomes are so important with an ISP in the CLTS program is because services that we provide either through CLTS or in the community, or services that you may need to get to that outcome, should all kind of align or connect to that outcome, like where you want to go. And so an outcome can have more than one service, more than one item or support to help make that outcome a reality. And one of the things I wanted to share is maybe an example, and to also preface this by saying, it's okay if you don't understand what an outcome or a goal is or what the difference is. That really is where your support and service coordinator comes in, and their professional kind of expertise to help you talk that through a little bit more in the deciding together conversation. But we just wanted to kind of give you a general overview of it, so maybe you can start thinking about it to help you talk the next time with your support and service coordinator. And an example I wanted to share is just thinking of my own family life. I do have a child who struggles with some impulsivity and some behavioral things. And I think when I think about an outcome for my child, I think like, I would love to see him handle his emotions safely throughout the day, like those big emotions. Like that would be the ultimate of like what success would look like, is that throughout his day, he's handling those emotions safely. You could use the word appropriately. And so that would be my outcome. But for goals, that might look like, well, okay, what are the little things we need to know we've gotten to that outcome? Well, hopefully maybe some fewer physical outbursts throughout the day. Completing like an ask from me as his mom or his dad with fewer reminders, or kind of that struggle of to get to do your basic daily skills, like brushing your teeth or getting ready for school, doing your homework, playing more with his siblings instead of fighting, sleeping better at night, having a better bedtime routine. Maybe those could be some of the smaller goals we would work on. And then out of that, to achieve those goals and get to that ultimate outcome with my support and service coordinator, we might then start to talk about, well, what services or items or supports could help us get there. And that may be some individual therapy, maybe some family therapy, maybe that's some sort of neuropsych eval to see what's going on with my child and how their brain is working. Maybe that's checking in weekly with my child's school to see how his homework is going and how his work is going. Maybe it's some calm down items to help him when he's feeling frustrated, or creating a space in his room where he can go to calm down. Maybe it's more family time or recreation or exercise time at the Y. Maybe it's even helping us develop a positive behavior support plan so we can start dealing with his frustration in a more positive way. And lastly, it could also just mean respite for me, because I find I can deal with his frustration and behaviors better if I've had a break. So I just wanted to kind of share like how that flows. It kind of goes from big outcome and like narrows down to goals, and then services and supports.
So it strikes me that the outcomes that we're talking about are sort of related to it sounds like to safety, to quality of life, to some way making life better. And then
Yep.
these goals are steps to get to that outcome. So there, like you said, there can be multiple goals
Yep.
to get to the outcome. There's usually not just an easy step toward it. It's a discussion, and it's looking at all the different things that could lead to achieving that outcome, to achieving that outcome in life, that better quality of life. Am I thinking
Yeah.
about that correct?
Yeah, I think so. And I think to Lisa's point earlier, I think, there could be many kiddos out. I know like my family isn't the only family struggling with a kiddo, that has trouble coping with their emotions and impulsivity. There could be lots of families out there that maybe have a similar outcome of, I just want to have a better day. I want my child to have a better day, to be able to cope better. But each family's goals and then those services and supports are going to look very different on how they may get to that ultimate outcome. And that's again where that individualized conversation with your SSC comes into play, and really making that plan look like what works for you and your family, feels familiar, feels like, yeah, this is doable for us as a family. That may not be the same for the family down the road who's enrolled in the same program and maybe even has a kiddo with some similar struggles or glows about them as your child.
So we have this outcome, we have these goals leading up to the outcome. We have parents who, as a parent, I can look at my child, I can look at my life. I'm in the midst of my life. I'm in the midst of my child's life. And so I see the needs, I see some struggles, I see the high points, I see what's going well, I see what I wish maybe could go better. I'm assuming it sounds like this support and service coordinator might be the one to help me translate what I am seeing in life and what I hope for my child into the language that can be part of the children's long-term support waiver and could possibly then have some funding toward it if necessary. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Tim, thank you for the question. I am Christina Courtney, and I am coming to you from Brown County. I'm in Green Bay, and I work for Brown County Health and Human Services with our Children's Long-Term Support Program, and like Lisa, also our Birth to 3 program. So I am going to talk a little bit about how to collaborate and work well together with your support and service coordinator. So you're right. Different programs call this person different titles. So some of you may be more familiar with referring to this person as like a case manager, a service facilitator, service coordinator, case coordinator. So there's all kinds of different terms that different programs utilize. In children's long-term support and service coordinator is our technical term, but of course, some families feel more comfortable with others, which is fine as well. So just wanting to talk a little bit about tips that we could give you to communicate effectively with your support and service coordinator. And I wanted to start out by just acknowledging how challenging of a program children's long-term support is. It is very difficult to navigate, both for families and for staff. I always tell staff when they come on board that it takes at least a year to feel like you sort of know what you're talking about when it comes to children's long-term support, because it is very complex. So I'm going to share with you a few different ideas for how to communicate. And then also we have a great document that I'm going to share with you as well. So in terms of building that relationship with your support and service coordinator, we talked about this ahead of this meeting today, and a lot of us talked about how it is similar to any other relationship that you may develop in your life, where it does take time and work on developing that relationship and building up that communication. So it's something that both we have to work on, on our end at the county, and also families work on. We are wanting to let families know that it is okay to ask questions and to ask for clarification, because we know that it is difficult when you have, a person in a case manager authority role working with you. It's hard to admit that you're not sure, some of the things they're asking you about, or you're not sure how to make decisions or what decisions to make. So we just want to make sure families hear that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask your support and service coordinator to repeat things that they may have already shared with you. It's okay to ask them to share things in a different way. So maybe you are a visual person and they're explaining something to you over the phone, and you're just not able to follow. So it's okay to ask for them to share information in the way that you learn best. Um, Other things we had thought of is just to be upfront and honest when a conversation doesn't seem to be going the way you had hoped or envisioned. If it doesn't seem to you that you're being heard by your support and service coordinator, that is something, that obviously try to avoid, but it does happen sometimes where there's either miscommunication or a family and support and service coordinator just aren't connecting or getting on the same wavelength.
That is
Um,
so, Christina. I just think that that is so important because when we talk about what we were trying to do and what we were trying to accomplish is this family's looking at their child. So there's this emotional component that is automatically tied into the family. And on the other hand, you guys wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't care, if you didn't want to make a difference in family's life. So you have an emotional connection as well. And sometimes when we have two sides that not only are trying to communicate, but that there's some underlying emotions in there, it can
mhm.
lead to some conflict without anybody intending there to be conflict. And so the ability to sit back and say, can we just, I think we've lost the stream here. Can we just get back to the stream? Can we just, I'm not feeling heard. Can we just slow down and go back over? The fact that families and the supports are asked to, have the ability to do that, I think is
Mhm.
just really important because it can be so hard with families, like you said, trying to navigate this system they don't understand, and then looking at the needs of their child. So I really appreciate the fact that you guys are really open to those questions from families.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is a need to develop trust in that relationship, and that can take time and, like we said, effort. It, it doesn't go well every time, and families do have the ability to request another person to review some decisions that are being made. So that's always an option as well. Um, but when communicating with your support and service coordinator, another
Mhm.
thing we wanted to mention is just to be open and use, we thought, just to suggest using the I statements, like we just said about how emotional it gets, with us really wanting to help and the family really wanting the help. Things do get stressful, and so important to try to communicate your feelings through use of I statements. So what I mean by that is when you're feeling like something maybe isn't going smoothly or well, to explain that you're feeling frustrated because of this, or when this happens, or because you're needing something that's not being given. Um, so just to make sure that you're clearly communicating that as how you're feeling, and then we try to do a really nice job of providing empathy and validation and support when that comes up. I think I wanted to mention, as you talked about trust as well, Tim, that we recognize also that some of the families we work with do have some, distrust, or maybe not seeing county workers in a positive way. We can really understand and appreciate that that might be the case. So we do try very hard to build that trust and develop the relationship, and hopefully um, you know, allow that family to be able to let us in and help us learn about them so we can best support their needs.
I mean, you're absolutely right on that, Christine. Is a lot of times children with special healthcare needs, their interactions are not always positive
Mhm.
with, I mean, just because of the sheer number of systems that they're coming in contact with your medical system. You know, if you have a doctor who does not explain a diagnosis well or does not explain supports well, then you feel stuck in that system. If you have a school that's not explaining special education well or a 504 plan well, then you feel stuck in that system. You're butting against a community that may not understand the need for adaptive sports and to open up what's offered to the community to children with special healthcare needs. And so there are a lot of times where it feels like you're just asking and asking and nobody's listening. And
Mhm.
so being able to have that relationship where you have somebody listening to you is really important in a family's life.
Yeah, and that is really key, because there are so many services oftentimes and providers involved, and families are unfortunately getting mixed messages. Like they might hear from somebody they've had contact with, well, CLTS can fund this or that. And then they get to their support and service coordinator and are hearing, no, this doesn't sound like a good fit. And then that gets really frustrating. And we understand that.
I imagine you get calls like, well, you know, my friend Bobby Joe over in such and such county got blank or was fun.
Absolutely.
They're on the program fund. So how do you work with the family to help them understand how the program's individualized? And it's not just, oh, they got this, so you get this. Is that it has to do with your family's needs, outcomes, that quality of life that we talked about before. How can you help a family have that conversation? Because that's a really hard conversation.
Yeah, I can take that, or does anybody else want to take that? I feel like it's really going back to the ISP and outcomes, Tim, and I think that's what Lisa was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried to explain that a little bit before. You may have somebody that come and say, you know, Johnny's family, you know, they got, you know, they're getting this. I need that for my child too. So I think it's really our job to help a family break down that. Okay, let's look at your family's individual situation. Like, tell me a little bit more about your day. Where are you struggling the most? So it really is our job to help a family break that down then. Like I said, you know, they may say, I need respite. This is how much respite this family is getting. That's what I need. But really then it's our job to dig a little bit deeper with that family and have that conversation and really meet them where they're at that point in time. So
Yeah, I agree. I think whenever you hear that ask for something, I think that's an opportunity to check in with the family and say, what's going on? Because I think if a parent asks for something, it's not typically, I don't think it's just because we want the same thing that Johnny has down the street. It's that we're thinking somewhere in our mind, hey, that would help my kid somehow because this is going on with my kid. And it's about getting into that conversation and not being so narrow focused on just the thing or the service. And can we pay for it?
Mhm.
I love that bigger conversation. That's fantastic. So did you guys also have like services or something that you wanted to share with us as well as, you know, the possibilities that families could be thinking about with their support and service coordinator?
Yes, we have a wonderful document we wanted to share, and Tara's pulling that up now. It is called the Children's Long-Term Support Waiver Supports and Services at a Glance. This is relatively new. It was created in 2020. Great handout that Department of Health Services created to help us utilize with families when making decisions about what should go on their ISP based on their goals and outcomes. So this helps really break down um, the different service opportunities that are available through Children's Long-Term Support Waiver. What I really love about this is that I think it helps. It's simple to read, first of all. So it's straightforward, simple language. I think that it helps the family be able to learn the same language that the support and service coordinators use. So you heard, you know, Mary, when she talked about her child's needs, be able to rattle off, I need respite, I need, you know, this, I need that. But not all families have that language developed. So this really is a great tool for families to learn kind of how to speak the language of children's long-term support.
And how would a family use this tool then, Christine, or anybody on the call? I mean, we have these different categories and everything, but that's still a lot of information for a family.
It
How
is
do
a
you help
lot,
them break
yeah.
that down into outcomes and goals?
Yeah, and that's really what we do when we have that conversation about, you know, what are we identifying your areas of need as? So when I know in Brown County, I can speak to our process, is that we do give this to all families at the time of creating the ISP. And it really helps guide that conversation. One of the things we do is, you know, try to break these things down even more or give them specific community examples of things that we have utilized or have available in each of those areas. So that might help the family really realize, oh, that's, you know, this provider or this type of thing that I'm looking for. So we just try to break that down in that conversation. I think this does really give families ideas too. It's another great like brainstorming tool for families and support and service coordinators to use as a way to really think broadly about goals and needs versus just kind of narrowing it into, well, I know I need respite, and then that's all, you know, that's as far as the conversation goes, because you just don't know what else is out there.
Because you're going to have, you know, I would imagine you'd have a parent say, I could really just use a couple hours rest a week. You know, they don't know what respite means, but they know that they need a break. Or, you know, I just can't seem to get him to brush his teeth on a regular basis. You know, they're not going to say, oh, I need some help with his daily living skills.
Right.
And so being able to translate that, this helps, this document helps the family realize that their needs are real, for one, but they fall under these categories. And then, like you said, you can talk the same language. And I think that that's really cool. I really like this document.
You're right. I actually do think that's another great reason to utilize it, is that it does help maybe that family not feel so isolated, and that like there are other families that are in need of the same things we feel like we're in need of. So that is a great way to frame it as well.
Well, I would like to take a moment to see if there are any questions that people would like to put in the chat, or if they would like to unmute and ask any questions for the panel that we have here today. Or I know that we also have people that are familiar with the Children's Long-Term Support Program and familiar with support and service coordinators. And if there's something you would like to add to the conversation, that'd be very welcome as well, because we want to have a really rich conversation. So if you have any questions, you can put in the chat, or like I said, if you'd like to unmute, I'll be keeping an eye on unmuting. But please feel free to ask questions or add to the conversation. Don't make me call out names. Okay, well then, any final thoughts or anything that you weren't able to talk about that you think is really important? As you guys all know, I'm looking forward to having you back even more today, because this is such a huge, that the children's long-term support is so much help for families. It can be such an important support in their lives, that being able to help that part of the system, this little part of the system, you know, because we know the families are dealing with a lot of different systems, but if we can help this part of the system work better, that's a worthy goal. And so I look forward to having more conversations about, you know, this whole set of how do you decide on goals and what are goals, and we can have that down the road, because I know you guys aren't going anywhere, right? Promise me you're not going anywhere. Y'all staying where you are.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I think just a few nuggets like I'd like to say is, when we talk about how complex the program is, it is a complex program, but I guess I like to think, as I've learned more about the program, being in this role for a year and a half, it's so complex because it can do so much for a family. And that is phenomenal. And it's complex because it can stay with a child and a family from birth to 18. I mean, just those things in and of itself are complex. And so I guess I just wanted to say complex can be a negative, but it also can be a positive. And we want to help families get through those complexities in any way we can. And that's why we look forward to coming back to discuss, deciding together more, maybe tease out a little bit more about outcomes and how to talk about them. All of those things we just look forward to.
Any other final thoughts, final words? You guys are amazing in the time frame that you took to help us understand better. So I really appreciate the time, the effort. I know that there was some planning that went into trying to distill this down into digestible chunks. And I just think that that's so important because it's so easy for families and professionals to get overwhelmed with volumes of information and guidelines that are out there. And so being able to take a step back and explain some of the processes, some of the terms is very helpful. And I really appreciate your time. And seeing how there's nothing coming up in the chat, I'm going to let you know that I'm going to stop the recording. If you could just hold on to the line, would love to then make other goodbyes and maybe plans. So thank you so much for being here today. And those that are listening, thank you so much for listening. Really do appreciate your time.
Thank you.